All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kid Talks Politics Show. This podcast will spread the libertarian message, show us how the Republicans and Democrats have failed us, and spread the message of small government, freedom, and liberty all throughout the United States. Today, I'm joined with Natalie Bruno, the Libertarian candidate for State Senate in Oklahoma's 22nd District. So before we get started, just kind of tell everyone about yourself and why you're running for State Senate in Oklahoma.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. So
Yeah.
essentially, the reason why I decided to run is because I live in a very Republican state, which has its pros and cons, but a lot of the cons is the fact that there's just a whole lot of regulation on things. They're not as open and are not as willing to give everybody the free range to, live in liberty with personal freedoms as they should be. And so, especially with myself having children that are going to be growing up in this world, I decided that instead of just talking about things that needed to be changed, that it would only make the most sense for me to actually run for a position where I can actually make change in our state.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked a lot about regulations. So let's start with the economy. I just kind of want to start off with a very broad question about Oklahoma and how you're going to change it for the better. So what are some of the priorities if you are elected to make Oklahoma's economy better than it already is?
Absolutely. So in Oklahoma itself, it is very reliant on the oil and gas industry. The problem with that, though, is it is not very stable. It very much so goes on highs and lows. And a lot more recently, it has been on the low end than the high end. So since they set their budgets and everything on how many taxes and stuff that they can bring in through the industries, a lot of times they will over budget because they think that oil and gas is going to do really well and we're going to get a lot of taxes from it. But what happens is it actually ends up going down. COVID, for example, played a big part into that. And so now we're in a situation where we're upside down on our budget. So it's really important that we remove a lot of regulations and red tape that makes it really hard for really big industries to come in and flourish here. For example, Elon Musk actually was looking at Tulsa, Oklahoma as one of the two possible locations for their new truck that they were going to be creating a warehouse for production for. But we ended up losing out to Austin, Texas, because of the fact that it is a lot more easy to do business there than it is here in Oklahoma. We have income tax, we have all these additional issues that Texas does not have. And so, we've lost a really great opportunity for stable jobs in our state just because of the way that we have everything set up.
Yeah, so that kind of brings me into my next thing, which is taxes. You talked about the tax money that is coming in from the gas industry and the oil industry in Oklahoma. So a lot of libertarians want to get rid of as many taxes or lower them a lot of the times as possible. So kind of a two-part question. What specific taxes in general are you looking to lower if you do want to lower taxes? And also, you're only one person in a state senate, so it would kind of be hard to get stuff done when it comes to taxes in general. So let's say you can't lower taxes as a state senator. How will you make sure the tax money is actually spent to help the people of the state of Oklahoma? Because it's kind of one thing to just say, I'm going to get rid of taxes, but sometimes it's not realistic because you're only one person. So how would you make sure that the tax money is actually going to the correct, well, first of all, the first question would be, what taxes do you want to repeal or lower? And then the second question would kind of be, if those taxes can't get lowered or repealed, how would you make sure that tax money is being spent in the correct kind of way?
Absolutely. That's a really great question. So you brought up a really great point, which is you're right. We can't just go in and, I'm not going to by any means try to say I'm going to go in and by golly, just myself, I'm going to remove all these taxes because, not only am I looking at a situation where I'm going to be the only libertarian when I win in that entity, but it's also not good for our state if you just, even if I did have the ability to just go in and yank all the taxes, that's not something you want to do just all at once and just be like, hey, let's just pull everything off. And so it's definitely a system where we're going to have to educate people and slowly move things in that direction. So to answer the one question, I would definitely
Hello?
And also,
Oh, okay. Okay, you cut out for a second. So you said you were going to lower, and then after that, it kind of cut out. So,
oh, I'm sorry about that. So
yeah, you're,
what I was saying was that I would look at doing away with our state income tax, because of the fact that, there's a lot of states, especially surrounding us, that do not do a state income tax. They only do the federal income tax. And it actually prohibits us from having a lot of people move into Oklahoma because of the fact that they do not want to pay that state income tax, especially for people who, for example, are retired. I'm going to use my dad as an example. He was in the military for 33 years and now gets military retirement each month. And as much as he would love to move to Oklahoma to be closer to his grandchildren, he stays in Texas because if he moves into Oklahoma, then he's going to lose part of that retirement money and income taxes each month. Where in Texas, he doesn't have to pay in that money. He gets to keep it for himself. So baby steps like that. Another thing I would do to make sure it's getting spent in the right place, because it quite honestly isn't. We've run into a lot of situations where extra funding was supposed to go to education that just hasn't. So we definitely need to do a full audit of our government spending, of our budget, and see what exactly are we spending money on, what is frivolous, what is actually needed, and kind of like rebuild our budget from the ground up.
yeah. So, what do you think are important things that the government needs to be involved in? So, a lot of libertarians want to privatize a lot of things so the government doesn't spend billions and trillions of dollars at the federal level, funding things that a lot of the times don't work. So, in your opinion, what are important things that the state government of Oklahoma needs to spend money on? Because there obviously are some things that, in a process of time you could phase out, but I don't know how long a term would be if you got elected, but you can't really phase it out or get rid of it in that amount of time. So what are the things that you're looking to keep when it comes to state spending from taxes?
Absolutely. So in this position, because it is a special election, I would only finish out the remaining 2 years that is currently on, and then I would rerun, and then I can. Our term limits here are 12 years. So assuming that I stay in that full 12 years, we have to look at the fact of realistically, what would I be able to remove or change? So stuff like that, the state income tax, that's, a theoretical possibility. Obviously, helping pull the budget down is something that we could theoretically do. We could talk about bills to remove or change the way we do property tax. That's a big deal because of the fact that, property taxes are based off of, the value of your home. And if your home continues to increase in value, that's more and more taxes you have to pay. Well, what if you have a grandparent that's on Social Security? They don't get as big of an increase each year as they try to increase in taxes sometimes. So we see people who end up losing their homes because they can't pay their taxes. So there's little things like that I think would be the most impactful. And it would give people who are not familiar with the Libertarian Party just enough of a glimpse of understanding of, hey, so there are better ways, to do things. We don't have to have the government, in control of every little thing that we do. A lot of times because it just doesn't work as well. As you mentioned before, a great example of that is even in regards to human services. You will have a lot of people that will tell you when they've needed food, it's been a lot easier for them to go to their church or go to the local food pantry in order to get food, because if they try to do food stamps, there's a process with that. You have to have all this paperwork. Sometimes people are working and they don't have the time to be able to go and get food stamps. So, those private industries that serve that same purpose end up providing so much better for the community than the government versions of those.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think a lot of times the reason why people don't vote libertarian is because they're scared that, a privatized system in a lot of different ways won't work. But I think it's very important for people to get into state and local government and show them that it can work. So you were talking about balancing the budget in general. And right now in Oklahoma, you guys have around $9 billion in state debt. So I think you kind of answered this a little bit, but in a more general stance, how would you attempt to lower this debt?
And so just like I would in my own household, when income changes, and like I said, a lot of the debt is probably because of the, thinking that we were going to have X amount of dollars coming in from oil and gas. And then since that industry went down, then we're like, we already have been spending this money. If I have my normal job is a salary plus commission job. So I have my base salary and then I have commission that I receive each month. But when I do my budget, I don't budget as if I'm going to have a certain amount of commission each month, because what if I have a bad month? I only do my budget based off of what I know for sure is coming in every month. And then if we have more than that, then that's a positive. Then we have extra money to spend on something. So we definitely need to realign our budget in a worst case scenario basis. Like worst case scenario, what are we going to have? We need to also go through and make sure that all of the budgets that are being sent in, we need to dig into those and audit, because a lot of times, we have a use it or lose it situation. They may not need to use all the money that an entity is given, but because of the fact that they don't want to not get that same amount next year in case they need it, they'll just blow the money on things they really didn't need, just so they can make sure to get that same funding next year. So we really need to dig in and see, what are we spending the money on? Is it really being used for things that it needs? And then we need to change the way that we budget and don't penalize people for, being efficient on their budgeting. And if they do end up coming under, don't penalize them for the next year in case they will need it the next year.
Yeah. So one more thing on the economy is government shutdown. So right now, all throughout the country, governors and politicians in general are shutting down their states because they think it will, quote unquote, save lives. Now, I don't know if Oklahoma has had, massive shutdowns. I don't really think it has. But
we did have a pretty big shutdown back in the beginning of April, if I remember correctly.
Okay. So you're a libertarian, so you probably don't support shutdowns. But if you don't support shutdowns, how do you plan to fight for Oklahoma to never shut down or attempt to shut down again? Because it's kind of hard to have a decent economy when the whole state is shut down. So how do you plan to fight for the state to not shut down? There's only so many things you can do as a state senator, but what would you attempt to do in order to have Oklahoma not shut down?
Absolutely. So you are right. There's only so many things that you could do in a state senate position. But, just like with any government held position, even if your specific area doesn't have the ability to do something, your voice is more valuable because of the fact of where you're employed. And, people who do have the ability to make those decisions, they usually, will try to have buy-in from others. Very rarely does someone want to just do something and have everybody be against it. But that being said, completely against the shutdown. It crippled so many businesses here, especially since obviously the Walmarts of the world got to stay open, but all the mom and pop places had to shut down. And because of the fact that, they were barely hanging on to begin with, because, they usually make just enough to feed their families and, keep their business open from month to month, they cannot recover from being shut down, for a whole month or 2 months. And so a lot of those businesses weren't able to reopen. And so, my suggestion is, and, the suggestion, luckily, of actually quite a bit of others, even not in the Libertarian Party, is we do not need to shut down. Even if there is a shutdown, it does not keep people, in their homes. They're still going to visit other people. The virus is still going to spread in that regard. But what we can do is we can look at the areas where they're the most impact, which is the lower income areas. They are more susceptible and have more issues with the spread of COVID because they do not have the financial means to protect themselves in the same way. So maybe that looks like, us assisting in using nonprofits to help provide more masks and hand sanitizer and other things that are needed for the lower income areas. Maybe that looks like, making sure that we as individuals, when we are in large areas, or if we are, going out in public, especially in areas where people are susceptible, that, maybe we wear masks, whatever those things look like to help slow the spread, because obviously I'm aware this is definitely, a real virus. I'm not one of those people that thinks it's a hoax. I've definitely seen firsthand, and I have a brother that's he's a nurse that actually worked on a COVID floor. So I know this is a very real issue, but we have to look, this is a short-term, real life issue that we need to help keep from spreading in the short term until we're able to, get it eradicated through the immunizations and stuff that are going to be coming out. But some of the things that we're doing to our economy by doing these shutdowns, you're talking about impacts that can impact someone's life for forever. Not saying that COVID actually, obviously some people have lost their lives to COVID and that's unfortunate, but the financial impact for everybody long term, you kind of have to weigh that out.
Yeah, of course. So that kind of gets me into healthcare, which has a lot to do with COVID-19. So it's a huge issue for most of Americans, and many Americans believe that a single payer system would be the way to go. So, first of all, what is your stance on healthcare? Do you think that a competition based system works? And if so, how do you plan to attempt to implement that more thoroughly into your state? Because, quite frankly, in the United States, we don't have that much of a free market healthcare system right now. So, how would you attempt to make Oklahoma's healthcare system more competition based?
Right. So it would be something that would honestly be very difficult to be able to do at my level. But what I can say is, we are headed in the right direction when it comes to, approving medicinal cannabis. So that does show that we're at least being more open-minded to the other forms of healthcare. Outside of that, I try to use an example when I'm explaining to people who, don't understand what a free market healthcare system looks like. And I bring up the fact that, I myself, I have, oh my gosh, my son, there we go. Sorry, I'm having a moment there. LASIK surgery. So you can go and get LASIK, paid out of pocket because of the fact that, most insurances will not cover or pay for part of it. And you can go get laser eye surgery that corrects your vision for the rest of your life for less than $1,000, sometimes even $750. And it's great quality LASIK. Okay. But I had to have a root canal done on my tooth that was covered by insurance, which is, far less impactful of a surgery. And after my co-insurance, I still had to pay over $900, because of the fact that when you get insurances involved and you get government involved, they're going to inflate those numbers because they know that Medicare and Medicaid and other places are going to have to pay for it because it's through insurance. So they skyrocket those numbers. But when they know that an individual is going to have to pay for it out of their own pocket, they make the prices more reasonable because they actually want to be able to have people afford it so they can actually have customers. And
I talk about LASIK and cosmetic surgery a lot when I'm talking to people about a free market healthcare system. But were you going to say something?
No, I was just finished. I pretty much finished that thought. Just explaining to people, a lot of people don't understand how that can change things. But when your individuals are actually paying for something, and even let's say, like I mentioned before, you can't just completely sweep the rug out from underneath people. Instead of giving free health care, free health insurance, giving an associated dollar amount that you can spend on healthcare each month is still going to achieve the same thing because they know that they have to be efficient cost-wise because you only have so many healthcare dollars that you can spend each year in order to get the surgeries done that you need to have done instead of having a full insurance system.
Yeah, so, and I think a lot of the prices also have to do with regulations in general that come from the government. And one of those regulations that would definitely, if we got rid of it, in my opinion, it would definitely save lives when it comes to COVID-19, and that is certificate of need laws. So it's in Oklahoma right now, and it basically says that in order to have a hospital or stuff like that, you need a certificate of need law. You need a need for the hospital, and therefore it kind of makes it harder for more hospitals to be created in the area. And if we had more hospitals, especially when it comes to COVID-19, more lives would be saved. So how do you plan to advocate as a state senator to get rid of certificate of need laws that I think if we did, well, first of all, are you against them or for them? And if you are against them, how would you plan to get rid of them at a state senate level?
Yes, so I am against the certificate of need. There's a lot of similar things like that as well that I am against, that I feel like is just, more red tape, more issues that we have, out there that keeps people from being able to, open thriving businesses. And a lot of that, more than likely has to do with lobbyists, because obviously the big hospitals here, of course, it benefits them if they're the only horses in town, because then they get all the business. And then, how there's less competition, that means the, the less that you have to worry about providing a good service to people, because, they don't have a whole lot of other options. So definitely am against that. What I could do in my position is obviously help write bills, help pass bills that would, remove those requirements for businesses in our state.
Yeah, so if I may ask, what are some other healthcare regulations specifically that you would look to get rid of?
Absolutely. We a lot of things, for example, VBACs. So in the state of Oklahoma, a lot of doctors are not able to get themselves insured to be able to perform regular births after cesarean birth. That's another one of those things that it's just, it should completely be up to the mother to be able to choose if she wants to have another cesarean or if she would like to have a normal birth. You also run into situations like, we have a huge opioid epidemic here. They're wanting to prescribe opioids for every single, issue that we have out there, instead of allowing, other kinds of treatment to be more widely seen as appropriate, like acupuncture and stuff like that. So it's not only just changing policy, it's also just changing the way that we're doing things and the policies and how the hospitals handle things. Because again, unless it benefits the hospital and they get to keep that money, there's no benefit for them to try to, push things outside of, their normal realm and to pass things on to other types of doctors.
Yeah, so if I didn't cover anything on healthcare, is there any other things about healthcare that you would like to tell voters or tell people that are watching the podcast?
Sure, absolutely. So one other problem that we have, I'm sure not just only in the state of Oklahoma, is the fact that even when we do provide services to people, so I like to bring this up because I got to experience it firsthand. So in 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And 2 weeks prior to that, I had actually decided to go back to school previously. And so I was actually dealing blackjack at a casino part-time while I was going back to school. And upon doing so, I got into a car accident and broke my hand and therefore lost my job. So whenever I did get diagnosed, I was diagnosed and I had no income. So I was able to qualify for an Oklahoma Cares grant, which basically, pays for women who have breast cancer or cervical cancer, as long as they're under a certain income level. So they were providing services for me, which was fantastic, and I greatly appreciated it. But then when I went back to work, because of course I wanted to work, at the time I just wasn't able to. So I started going back to work, but I had to be careful not to go over that threshold of income so I could still get my treatments and have it paid for. But then my daughters, my first husband, we were already divorced. He passed away and therefore left him Social Security money. And so whenever I started receiving that Social Security income, they considered it as part of my income. And then they actually removed my insurance from me, didn't even tell me I had a surgery, and ended up getting a $150,000 bill. So they really make it hard for people who even do need these services in order to phase themselves out, because they'll just pull the rug right up from under you. There's a solid line, and if you're over that line, then that's it. So, a lot of people, they're scared to try to do better for themselves because of the fact that, if I go over this dollar amount, I'm going to lose my health care, I'm going to lose my, daycare or whatever kind of government support that they're receiving. So I think that we'd be able to get more people off of government assistance if we had a better tiered program instead of just, you're either over this or under this and that's it.
Yeah, I just feel like the government tries to solve one problem and then creates 15 other problems along the way.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah, so let's talk about coronavirus more, a little bit more than we did with the government shutdowns. So I just really want to ask a broad question. What do you plan to do to get COVID under control? And you kind of answered that a little bit with the government shutdowns question, but more broadly speaking, what are your plans to get COVID under control? This is something that obviously affects everyone in America. So, what are your plans to control COVID in a better way than it is right now?
Absolutely. Well, here in the state of Oklahoma, the governor has really been managing that, and the state senate hasn't had a whole lot of input into those changes. But I will say, from a personal level, if I was in a position to be able to make those kinds of decisions, I would definitely make sure that we were able to provide more tests, to the urgent cares in the hospitals to be able to give to people, because part of the problem is that people are more apt to spread the disease if they can't easily get tested and know for sure they have it. And since so many people are asymptomatic, what happens is you have a person, they test positive, they tell their friends and family they've been around, and coworkers, hey, you may have been exposed. Well, they're going to say, well, I feel fine. If I get symptoms, I'm going to go get tested, because they don't want to have to wait in line for 2-3 hours in order to get a test. Or in some cases, my stepson had to get tested because his wrestling mate ended up testing positive, and it was only 10:30 in the morning, and every single testing center had already said that their tests that they were given for the day were already allocated and gone. So we have to be able to get more tests. The more tests that we can have, that means the more testing of people that we can have. So then people are able to make more educated decisions, on what they're doing. So if they know that they can easily get a test and it's positive, then they know to stay away from others. Wherein right now it's so hard to get tested, people are going without testing and just assuming that they're negative.
Yeah, absolutely. So, another thing that affects people's lives and a lot of people talk about when it comes to politics is guns and the Second Amendment. So, I just kind of want to briefly talk about this. So, as a libertarian, I'm sure you're pro Second Amendment. So, if so, what are the gun regulations you would like to get rid of in the state of Oklahoma? And, like, are there any certain gun regulations that you would like to get rid of as a state senator?
So here in Oklahoma, we actually have very liberal gun laws. So we have what's called a constitutional carry. So you don't even have to have a license in order to carry a gun. So
Okay.
this is actually a really great state for gun owners. When it comes to the types of guns and everything, the same regulations that we have are the same ones that are the federal regulations that obviously the federal government would have to change before we would have anything to do with it. So we're really grateful for where I live in that regard. We are a household that has guns. My children have been raised around guns. I've been raised around guns. So, I am definitely pro Second Amendment. And there really isn't a whole lot that I could change, from my level, because of the fact that we are a very liberal Second Amendment state. But from a national standpoint, if I ever made it up to Congress situation, I would remove as many of the gun laws as possible, just because of the fact that, we have, they say you have your right to bear arms. It's in the Constitution. A lot of the reason why we have so many issues with the guns, where you see like a kid accidentally shooting another kid and stuff like that, is because we are not raising our kids around guns anymore. Like, I have 6 children. They have been raised around guns their entire life. They know they're not toys. They do not touch them. They know how to handle them. They know how to respect them, because that's the way that they were raised. And that's the way they were raised, 100 years ago. Now, people are so scared to even show their kid a gun, and that's kind of adds that taboo to it. And if they don't know how to touch, they don't know, they're not around it, they don't realize that they can kill people and what their purpose is, of course you're going to have situations where people get hurt, just like with anything else.
Yeah. Okay. So now I want to move on to a very important section of today's podcast, and that is, in general, the Libertarian Party has a very hard time winning elections, and I think we gained 15 seats locally and statewide this year, but that just isn't enough, in my opinion, to make a change. And of course, we're going to make a change, but we need a lot more culture of winning in the Libertarian Party. So everything that you've talked about in this podcast doesn't matter if you don't win. But I mean, it does. But at the same time, in order to make change, we have to win. So what is your campaign doing to try to win this election? And because we need people in state and local government to be able to have a chance at winning federal elections. We can't go in with Joe Jorgensen and expect to win if we don't have any people running at the state and local elections. So what are your plans of winning? How are you going to win? What things are working for you?
Absolutely. And you know what? That is a really, really great point. So first of all, I'm going to start with what I think is kind of happening across the United States, which is we just want to teach the Libertarian platform so badly that we are just asking anybody to run for offices, even people that have no business running for a political office. Yeah. And their thought process there is, oh, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I know I'm going to lose, but at least they'll know that there's a Libertarian on the ticket. And I don't believe that that's the best premise, because of the fact that you're putting in people's heads that Libertarians lose. Like, that's just what they do, that they're a joke. And, you know, we have people that shouldn't even be running for political offices, just because we just want to get it out there, and it is actually hurting us more than it's helping us. So, you know, I think that people need to actually take running for positions more seriously. And you know, just like with anything else, if you don't think you actually have a shot of winning, or if you're not actually going to put in the work to win, then you should not be running. Personal opinion. So that being said, you know, I have been setting myself up for this for quite a while. So, you know, in my community, for example, you know, I have made sure to put myself into my community so that way people already know who I am before I'm running for an office. So, for example, you know, I am on the associate board for a nonprofit here called Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, which is pretty big. I am also a basketball and soccer coach at the YMCA here in my community, in my district, that I have been doing the last 3 years. I've been very involved with my kids' school. I am also had been a CASA volunteer for almost 5 years. And then on top of that, I've also been involved with multiple other nonprofits. You know, I go to a very large church in my district. So I spent a lot of time over the past 4 years, you know, dedicating to serving my community already before even offering to serve being their senator. So I'm not just a random unknown person that's just jumped up out of bed and said, you know what, I'm going to try to run for state senate. I've actually been putting in the work already for the last 4 years by donating and serving my time. So that way, when I did run for senate, people already know who I am, they know what I stand for, and they know my integrity.
Yeah, I think it's so important that people get out in the community before they run, because I don't think you can expect to win without knowing what people want around you and them knowing that you're actually running. So what do you think you guys have a good chance of winning in general? So, like, do you think you have a realistic chance of being able to win this election? I think a lot of people want to know if we're going to win.
Oh, absolutely. And I do not say that in a form of cockiness. It's purely a form of confidence. You know, I know how involved I am in the community. I don't know if you know this or not, but I was actually the marketing director for Joe Jorgensen in the national campaign.
Okay.
I do marketing and advertising for a living. That's what I do. So I know how much money needs to legitimately be used to have a successful campaign. I know how to use data, you know, to my, you know, in my best efforts to contact every person that's likely to vote, and use purchase data that way. And I also plan on knocking on every single door. So no, I absolutely, especially knowing who I'm running against, I think it's more of a matter of how much I'm going to win than whether or not if I'm going to win or not.
Okay. So one more question about the culture of winning in the Libertarian Party. What is some advice to people who are thinking of running as libertarians, what is some advice from your standpoint? What do you think works, and what advice do you give them?
Yeah, so definitely, make sure that you are in a position to run for your position comfortably. And I mean that in the utmost of respect. So obviously, if you're going through a lot of hard times at home, or if you're barely able to pay your own bills, or if you've got a whole lot of family issues going on, then now's probably not the time for you to run. And it would be better serving of your time to help with somebody else's campaign than to try to run yourself. So definitely make sure that you are in a sound position to be able to run for an office. Secondly, use all of your, state and national, people that you can. There's so many people, not even in your own state, but in other states that are very knowledgeable and would be completely willing to help you if needed. I am so grateful that I have such amazing team members that are actually all over the United States and not even just in my state that are, supporting me and helping me to win this campaign. The support is definitely there. Spike is actually going to be coming and doing a fundraising event for me in January. We've got a great, solid party with great people. You just have to reach out and ask for that help, and they will do anything that they can to help you and support you and get you the volunteers that you need to be successful. As long as you do your part, which is make sure that you're in a position to run. And also, you have to have boots on the ground too. You can't just, buy a billboard and say, oh, that's good enough. Like, you need to be out knocking on doors. You need to be out talking to people, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so there are a few topics that we didn't talk about today, so I just want to give you a chance to talk about those briefly. So, first, if you would like to talk about the education system as well as college in general, if you would like to talk about that, that's fine.
Yeah. So, in regards to, education in general, for our state, our education system is set up pretty poorly, but I've already spoken to a lot of the things that I think that'll fix that, which is making sure to audit government departments and to make sure that money is going to where we say that it's going to go. So when we say we're going to increase funding for education, that we actually do increase funding for education, and try to be more competitive, in the landscape for our teachers in regards to teacher pay, because our teachers are some of the worst paid teachers in the United States. And our education system, like, that's the foundation for everything. So it's really important that we make sure to refocus our efforts in that department.
Okay, so one more thing I want to talk about is drugs and prohibition, as well as criminal justice reform in general. So a lot of libertarians say, like, Joe Jorgensen was for legalizing all drugs, and a lot of people are just for legalizing marijuana. So, in your opinion, what are you for?
I am for decriminalizing all drugs. And the reason is this. As we've seen with alcohol, and as we've also seen with marijuana, when you make something legal, you make it safer, you make it easier for people to get help, and then it also keeps from ruining people's lives and enables them to still have a positive outlook on life once they are able to get clean. It's one of those things where it's a victimless crime, and we should be helping people get clean and helping people fix those underlying issues instead of just throwing them away in jail.
Okay, so, and then criminal justice reform. This has been such a huge thing for all Americans this year, is how are we going to help people who are disproportionately, systemic racism in general, and criminal justice reform, helping everyone so we have a better society in general, like qualified immunity wise, and so many other ways that we can help African Americans and everyone as a whole. So, what is your plan to fix the criminal justice system?
I'm glad you asked that, because criminal justice reform is actually my number one issue. So, in the state of Oklahoma in 2019, we were ranked second when it comes to highest amount of imprisoned individuals per capita, and we were actually number one for imprisoning women. We also sentence our nonviolent criminals, so people with drug possession, for example, 80 to 100% longer sentences than most other states. So this state in particular really, really struggles. Not to mention, we are in the top 5 when it comes to people dying by police force. So huge, huge issues in Oklahoma when it comes to criminal justice. And of course, it disproportionately affects lower income and people of color. So for myself, there's so many things that I have on the platform. One of the things is we have some great nonprofits here that are trying to help get bills and stuff approved in order to change the way that we're sentencing people. Even we have 2 women that I just recently heard of that are both spending over 20 years in prison for drug possession, and we have people who are have assault and battery charges, rape charges, that are let out on the streets after just 10 years. And there's something seriously wrong with that. For a multitude of reasons. And the best way to help, our lower income and people of color is to help make things more fair, which is, removing a lot of these barriers that are more susceptible to them, changing the way that we're doing sentencing, letting people out of prison who are in jail just for nonviolent drug offenses. So that way they can be home and working and helping provide for their families and helping raise their children. So that way we can stop this vicious cycle that happens, in these communities. And that's just the start. Definitely doing away with qualified immunity, is another thing. A lot of people are worried that if we do away with qualified immunity, then people will stop being police officers. And I don't agree with that, because in cases where a police officer would actually need to use force that ends in death, that means that they were in a situation where a normal individual would have been protected as well, which is, if you're protecting yourself or others, if you, felt like you were going to get, killed or seriously injured yourself, we have those same rights right now, to protect ourselves. So they would fall under those same rights, but it allows us to hold them to the same standard that we hold other individuals. And then also, I say defunding the police. I hate that term. Whoever came up with calling it defunding the police is a horrible marketer, because, of course, it puts people on the defensive. What they really should have called it is refunding the police, which is that, we expect our police officers to be social workers. We expect them to deal with the mentally ill when we have, somebody who's having a psychotic episode. Like, we put all these pressures on our police officers and then wonder why they're not able to do well at their job. Well, you have somebody that is, we're all individuals, we're all human. We can only handle to be really good at so many things. And we cannot be the judge, the jury, the executioner, the social worker, the psychiatrist, the family care worker. Like, we can't expect them to be all of those things. So if we decriminalize drugs and we, make it easier for other health services to be out there to help with our mentally ill and stuff like that, it's going to free up so much time for the police officers that they can actually go back to, protecting and serving, instead of having to deal with all these other little tiny things. And, it would be great to get to a position where we are able to see our police officers, as positive people in our, in our communities again, like firefighters and, the military are, but it's going to be a while before we can get there.
Yeah, I totally agree. So one more thing. A lot of people that I've talked to, or people in general, when you say decriminalizing drugs, they're scared. They think that, it's not going to be safe. The community isn't going to be safe. There's going to be gangs running around in their local community. So I think it is very important as libertarians that we explain to them how drug prohibition doesn't work. So what would you tell those people who are just scared about what's going to happen if we decriminalize drugs?
Absolutely. So, I know that this analogy is kind of played out, or maybe I just feel like it's played out because since I was so involved with Joe's campaign, and she uses this exact same analogy when she speaks to people. But, look at alcohol. Obviously you're going to have those situations where, for example, so-and-so's older brother bought us a 6-pack of beer, those kinds of situations. But those, even if drugs are legal or illegal, you're always going to have those situations. But you do not have people, you do not have rival gangs, arguing over, who gets to have what block to sell alcohol to. You don't have situations of people, drinking beer and it's laced with something else because it didn't go through proper health guidelines, and they end up dying. You don't have those crazy situations, with alcohol because alcohol is legal. But whenever alcohol wasn't legal, we, had bootleggers. We had people that were murdering people over alcohol. That's what happens, when make things illegal. But if we legalize it, then it allows us to make sure it's safer, So in the heaven forbid case where somebody does give something, to your child, unfortunately, because, just like with alcohol, those things do happen. At least you know that it's a safe version of that, and it's not something that's laced with rat poison and going to kill them. At least it'll be, if you know of a loved one that's struggling with substance problems, like we have people who struggle with alcohol problems, it's easier for those people to get help, because going and saying, hey, I'm an alcoholic, you are able to get help without as much stigma than if you say, hey, I have a drug addiction. Like, the drug addiction, holds so much of a heavier issue, not to mention somebody who gets caught with too much drugs on them, they could end up having a felony that affects them from being able to have a decent job or anything for the rest of their lives. You don't have that happen with alcohol, obviously not including DUIs and stuff like that. People can still get clean and have a bright future. Wherein with people and drugs, that's not the case. We're basically taking these people in their lives and then throwing them away. And I'm not okay with throwing them away.
Okay, so one more thing. Are there any issues that you want to talk about that we have not talked about?
No, I think we formed an issue that I wanted to make sure to touch on, and we were definitely able to do that. And honestly, I don't think there's ever enough time of the day to go into every single facet of it. So I think that from a high level, I think we really did do good at touching on everything.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. This was the Kid Talks Politics show. We talked to Natalie Bruno, someone who is running for Oklahoma's 22nd district for state senate. And I hope you have a great day. This was the Kid Talks Politics show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I really thank you for joining the podcast.